McLaren makes a huge push to fight for the title. Mercedes is in trouble for the engine trick, and all the latest F1 news. Picture this. The most dominant team in Formula One history just pulled off an engineering masterpiece that could make them unstoppable again. But here's the twist. Every other manufacturer on the grid wants it banned immediately. We're talking about Mercedes and their controversial compression ratio innovation that's about to shake up the entire sport. This isn't just another technical loophole. This could decide who wins championships for years to come. What's happening right now in Formula One is absolutely wild. Mercedes has discovered something that could give them a massive advantage heading into the new regulation era. And the best part? It's completely legal according to the FIA. But that hasn't stopped literally every other engine manufacturer from calling an emergency meeting to try and get it banned. Let me break down exactly what Mercedes has done and why it's causing such chaos in the paddock. Then we'll dive into the politics behind this controversy and what it means for the future of Formula One. Trust me, this story has everything. Engineering brilliance, political warfare, and potentially a complete reshuffling of the competitive order. So what exactly did Mercedes figure out? They've cracked the code on something called compression ratio manipulation. Now, before your eyes glaze over thinking this is too technical, stick with me because this is actually fascinating. The 2026 regulations specify that engines can't have a compression ratio higher than 16:1. Think of compression ratio as how much the engine squeezes the fuel and air mixture before ignition. Higher compression typically means more power. Here's where Mercedes got creative. The regulations state that engines must comply with this 16:1 limit during technical inspections, but Mercedes discovered they could design their engine to meet this requirement when it's sitting still in the garage, then automatically increase the compression ratio once the car hits the track. It's like having a sports car that looks completely normal during a police inspection but transforms into a supercar the moment you start driving. The genius of this solution lies in its technical execution. Mercedes engineers have developed a system that can dynamically adjust compression ratios while the engine is running. During static checks by FIA officials, everything appears perfectly legal. The moment those wheels start turning, though, the engine essentially reconfigures itself to extract maximum performance. It's engineering artistry at its finest. What makes this even more impressive is that Mercedes didn't develop this innovation in secret. They were in constant communication with the FIA throughout the entire development process. This wasn't some rogue engineering project happening in a hidden facility. Mercedes engineers were checking with race officials every step of the way to ensure they stayed within the rules. The FIA has consistently confirmed that this system is completely legal under current regulations. But here's where things get spicy. Just because something is legal doesn't mean your competitors have to like it. Every other engine manufacturer is absolutely furious about this development. Ferrari, Honda, Alpine, and even Aston Martin are all crying foul. They argue that the spirit of the regulations requires the 16:1 limit to apply both in the garage and on track. Think about the competitive implications here. Mercedes power units were already considered favorites heading into 2026, even before this compression ratio trick became public knowledge. Now they potentially have an innovation that could give them significant lap time advantages over their rivals. While estimates vary on exactly how much time this could be worth, competitors clearly believe it's substantial enough to potentially decide race outcomes. The political dynamics at play are fascinating. We're looking at a classic David versus Goliath scenario, except Mercedes is playing the role of both David and Goliath simultaneously. They're the underdog, cleverly exploiting regulations while also being the historically dominant team that others want to stop from becoming unstoppable again. What's particularly interesting is the timeline of this controversy. We're now in January 2026, just 2 months away from the season opener in Australia. The other manufacturers aren't even trying to get this banned before the first race. They know that's logistically impossible at this point. Instead, they're playing a longer game. Their strategy is much more calculated. The manufacturers are targeting a meeting with the FIA scheduled for January 22nd. Their goal isn't an immediate ban, but rather a prohibition that would kick in later in the season, possibly after the summer break. Alternatively, they're pushing for a complete ban starting with the 2027 season. This gives them time to either develop their own similar systems or ensure the playing field gets leveled. The political alliance against Mercedes is nearly universal. Ferrari, Honda, Alpine, and Aston Martin are all united in wanting this innovation eliminated. That's an incredibly rare level of consensus in Formula One, where manufacturers typically guard their own interests jealously. When you have that many competitors agreeing on something, it usually indicates they see a genuine threat to competitive balance. Interestingly, there's one notable exception to this anti-Mercedes coalition. Red Bull isn't enthusiastically pushing for tighter regulations. This could be because they have their own innovative solutions in development, or perhaps they believe they can compete regardless of what Mercedes brings to the table. Red Bull's stance could prove crucial in determining how this controversy plays out. The broader implications of this situation extend far beyond just one technical innovation. We're witnessing a fundamental clash between different philosophies of rule interpretation in Formula One. Mercedes represents the aggressive pursuit of every possible advantage within the letter of the law. Their competitors advocate for regulations that prevent such creative interpretations from providing significant competitive advantages. This controversy also highlights the challenges of regulating modern Formula One technology. Engine systems have become incredibly sophisticated, making it nearly impossible to write regulations that cover every possible scenario. Engineers will always find ways to push boundaries, and Mercedes has simply done this more successfully than anyone else. The timing of this innovation is particularly significant given Formula One's broader context. The sport is entering a new regulatory era designed to promote closer competition and more exciting racing. If Mercedes gains a substantial advantage from this compression ratio system, it could undermine those competitive balance goals before the new era even properly begins. Looking ahead to that crucial January 22nd meeting, several outcomes are possible. The FIA could maintain their current position and allow Mercedes to keep their innovation. They could implement restrictions starting mid-season or beginning in 2027, or they could potentially find some middle ground that allows the technology while limiting its competitive impact. The precedent set by this decision will reverberate throughout Formula One for years to come. If the FIA allows Mercedes to maintain their advantage, it sends a clear message that aggressive regulatory interpretation is acceptable. If they impose restrictions, it suggests there are limits to how far teams can push boundaries, even when staying within the technical letter of the law. What makes this situation so compelling is that there's no clear right or wrong answer. Mercedes followed the rules as written and developed something genuinely innovative. Their competitors have legitimate concerns about competitive balance and regulatory interpretation. The FIA faces the challenge of maintaining both technical innovation and sporting fairness. Regardless of how this specific controversy resolves, it's already changed Formula One. Teams will approach future regulation development with this Mercedes precedent in mind. Engineers will look for similar dynamic solutions that meet static requirements while providing on-track advantages. Rule makers will need to consider not just what teams might do, but how regulations could be interpreted differently in static versus dynamic conditions. The Mercedes compression ratio innovation represents everything that makes Formula One fascinating. It combines cutting-edge engineering, political maneuvering, competitive strategy, and regulatory interpretation into one compelling package. Whether you love or hate what Mercedes has done, you have to respect the sheer audacity and technical excellence of their solution. As we head toward that January 22nd meeting and the start of the 2026 season, this controversy will define how competitive the championship becomes. Mercedes might have just secured themselves years of dominance, or they might face restrictions that level the playing field. Either way, Formula One is about to become very interesting indeed. Picture this. Adrian Newey walks into the Aston Martin factory with his legendary notebook tucked under his arm, ready to transform one of Formula One's most ambitious teams. But here's the shocking truth that nobody's talking about. Even with the sport's greatest aerodynamic genius on board, Aston Martin just admitted they don't have what it takes to win championships. Yet. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see the upcoming Formula One season. While everyone's focused on the flashy car launches and driver lineups, there's a hidden battle happening behind the scenes that could determine who dominates the next era of racing. And it all comes down to something most fans never even think about. Welcome back to the channel, Racing Fanatics. Today, we're diving deep into the most honest admission in Formula One this year, and why it might actually be the smartest thing Aston Martin has ever said. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this brutal honesty could be their secret weapon for 2026. Let me start with the bombshell that sent shockwaves through the paddock. Lance Stroll, heir to the Aston Martin empire, looked reporters straight in the eye and said something no team owner's son should ever admit. "We don't have all the tools to be a top team." Can you imagine the courage that took? In a sport where confidence is everything, where teams spend millions on marketing to project strength, Aston Martin just showed their cards. But here's where it gets really interesting. This wasn't some desperate cry for help or a moment of weakness. This was calculated honesty, and it reveals something extraordinary about what's happening inside that British racing team right now. You see, when Adrian Newey first walked through those doors after his dramatic exit from Red Bull, he didn't just bring his reputation as the master of aerodynamics. He brought something far more valuable: the ability to see exactly what was broken. And what he found wasn't pretty. Remember, this is the man who designed championship-winning cars for Williams, McLaren, and Red Bull. His eye for detail is legendary. So when Newey looked at Aston Martin's simulation tools and declared them weak, that wasn't just criticism. That was a diagnosis. The team's driver-in-the-loop simulator, absolutely crucial in today's era of limited testing, needed serious work. Think about what that means for a moment. Modern Formula One cars are so complex that teams can't just show up to the track and hope for the best. Every aerodynamic element, every suspension setting, every power unit mapping needs to be tested virtually before the real car ever turns a wheel. Without proper simulation tools, you're essentially flying blind in a sport where the difference between winning and losing is measured in thousandths of seconds. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Instead of making excuses or trying to hide the problems, Aston Martin did something remarkable. They listened to their star designer and took action immediately. Within weeks of Newey's assessment, they brought in Giles Wood, Newey's former Red Bull colleague, who's considered one of the best simulation experts in the business. That wasn't all. They then hired Marco Finello, the former Ferrari simulation specialist who worked during Michael Schumacher's dominant years. Think about that pedigree for a second. Finello was part of the team that created the simulation systems behind some of the most dominant cars in Formula One history. This is where Aston Martin's brutal honesty becomes their superpower. While other teams might have tried to downplay their weaknesses or make grandiose promises, Aston Martin identified their problems, admitted them publicly, and then systematically started fixing them. That's not weakness. That's strategic brilliance. Now, let's talk about why 2026 is so crucial for everyone, but especially for Aston Martin. The new regulations aren't just a minor tweak to the existing cars. We're talking about a complete revolution: 50% electrification, fully sustainable fuels, and active aerodynamics. It's like starting from scratch. This is where Newey's legendary status becomes absolutely critical. He's not just good at designing fast cars, he's exceptional at understanding new regulations and finding advantages that others miss. Remember, every time Formula One has introduced major regulation changes, Newey-designed cars have been right there fighting for championships. But here's the plot twist that nobody saw coming. Honda, Aston Martin's new engine partner for 2026, just released the first images of their new power unit. And their president, Koji Watanabe, made his own shocking admission. Not everything is going well with their engine development. On the surface, that sounds terrible. Your engine partner struggling while your team admits to lacking crucial tools. But dig deeper and you'll see something beautiful happening. Both Honda and Aston Martin are being refreshingly honest about their challenges while working frantically to solve them. Watanabe went on to explain that while they're facing difficulties, nothing is fatal. They're concentrating on improving performance and reliability. More importantly, he emphasized their commitment to adapting to Newey's vision for the car. This isn't just about building an engine. It's about building the right engine for Newey's aerodynamic masterpiece. The timing of these admissions is absolutely crucial. We're still months away from the first race of 2026, but the development war is already in full swing. Every team is trying to project confidence while secretly panicking about the new regulations. Aston Martin and Honda, by contrast, are being transparent about their challenges while demonstrating their commitment to solving them. This brings us to Lance Stroll's perspective, which reveals another layer to this story. When asked about the pressure of having Newey on board, Stroll's response was telling. He emphasized that Newey is all about performance and winning, and that his presence pushes everyone to be better. This isn't about adding pressure, it's about raising standards. Newey doesn't just design cars, he transforms the entire engineering culture of a team. His legendary attention to detail and refusal to accept anything less than perfection creates a ripple effect throughout the organization. The evidence is already visible in how Aston Martin has approached their preparation for 2026. The systematic hiring of simulation experts, the partnership with Honda, and even their willingness to admit their weaknesses all point to a team that's learned from Newey's approach to excellence. But let's address the elephant in the room. Can honesty about weaknesses actually be a competitive advantage? In Formula One's world of smoke and mirrors, where teams guard their secrets obsessively, Aston Martin's transparency seems almost naive. Yet there's method to this madness. By publicly acknowledging their simulation deficiencies, they've sent a clear message to potential recruits. We know what needs fixing, and we're serious about fixing it. Top engineers want to work for teams that understand their problems and have the resources to solve them. Moreover, managing expectations can be incredibly powerful. When Mercedes dominated the early hybrid era, they constantly claimed to be behind their rivals in development. This psychological warfare kept competitors guessing while allowing Mercedes to exceed expectations consistently. Aston Martin seems to be employing a similar strategy, but with genuine substance behind it. They're not just managing expectations, they're actively building the infrastructure needed to exceed those expectations when it matters most. The 2026 season represents more than just new regulations. It's a reset button for the entire sport. Teams that have dominated for years might struggle with the new format, while previously midfield teams could suddenly find themselves fighting for victories. Aston Martin's honest assessment of their current capabilities, combined with their strategic investments in simulation technology and their partnership with Honda, positions them perfectly for this reset. They're not pretending to be ready now. They're building the foundation to be ready when it counts. As we look ahead to the upcoming season launches and testing sessions, remember what we've learned today. Behind the glossy marketing presentations and confident sound bites, the real battle is being fought in simulation centers and wind tunnels. Aston Martin's willingness to acknowledge their shortcomings while systematically addressing them might just be the most honest and effective approach in the paddock. The next few months will be absolutely crucial. Watch for signs of progress in Aston Martin's simulation capabilities, monitor Honda's engine, development updates, and pay attention to how other teams respond to this new level of transparency in Formula One. What do you think about Aston Martin's strategy of brutal honesty? Could this approach actually give them an advantage over teams that prefer to keep their problems hidden? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more insider analysis of Formula One's most fascinating developments. What if I told you that one of F1's brightest young stars might have just learned the most expensive lesson of his career? A lesson that could have cost him a world championship, but might actually make him unstoppable in the upcoming season. We're talking about Oscar Piastri. And according to Formula One legend Damon Hill, the Australian driver's 2025 campaign was both a masterclass in talent and a cautionary tale about being too nice in the ruthless world of motorsport. But here's the thing that's got everyone talking. Hill has identified a specific strength that sets Piastri apart from even his own teammate, and it could be the key to everything changing in 2026. Let me paint you a picture of what went down last season. Piastri was sitting pretty as the championship favorite after dominating the European leg of the calendar. The kid was on fire, looking like he was about to become the youngest champion in recent memory. His final victory came at the Dutch Grand Prix, where he extended his lead over teammate Lando Norris to a commanding 34 points with 9 races still to go. Everything looked set for a fairy tale ending to his third season in Formula One. But then Motorsport did what Motorsport does best. It served up a reality check that nobody saw coming. The turning point came at Monza, and this is where things get really interesting. Max Verstappen was controlling the race from the front, but behind him, McLaren had a problem brewing. Norris had suffered a slow pit stop that put him behind Piastri in the running order. Now, here's where it gets spicy. McLaren made a decision that would haunt them for the rest of the season. They asked Piastri to give the position back to Norris because the slow pit stop was considered a team error. Picture this scenario for a moment. You're fighting for your first world championship, leading the standings, and your own team asks you to hand over valuable points to your main rival. What would you do? Piastri, showing the kind of sportsmanship that's rare in elite motorsport, questioned the request, but ultimately complied. He gave up the position, gifting precious points to Norris in what was shaping up to be an incredibly tight championship battle. Verstappen's reaction tells you everything you need to know about how the paddock viewed this decision. When told about McLaren's position switch over team radio, the 4-time world champion openly laughed. Not a chuckle, not a smirk, an audible laugh. Even he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. From that moment, Piastri's championship dreams began to unravel like a poorly wound spring. A crash in Azerbaijan knocked him out of contention there, followed by a string of races where he simply couldn't find the form that had made him look unbeatable earlier in the year. By the time he rediscovered his pace in Qatar and Abu Dhabi, it was too little, too late. Both Norris and Verstappen had overtaken him in the standings, leaving the young Australian to settle for third place and a harsh lesson in championship politics. This is where Damon Hill's perspective becomes absolutely crucial. As the 1996 world champion, Hill knows exactly what it takes to win at the highest level, and he's not pulling any punches in his assessment of what went wrong for Piastri. Speaking on the Drive to Win podcast, Hill painted a picture of a driver who learned the hard way that being a team player can sometimes cost you everything. He believes Piastri hit rock bottom emotionally after McLaren's strategic fumble in Qatar handed Verstappen another victory, describing how the Australian probably couldn't believe what had happened to him. But here's Hill's key piece of advice, and it's advice that could completely transform Piastri's approach in 2026. The veteran champion believes Piastri needs to come back with a fundamentally different mindset, one that prioritizes his own championship ambitions over team harmony. Hill envisions Piastri returning to the paddock with a new attitude, telling his team that while he loves McLaren and appreciates everything they've done for him, his career has to come first. If they ask him to return points to his teammate again, he should question why he would even consider it. After all, that decision in 2025 might have cost him the world championship. This shift from team player to championship contender represents a crucial evolution in any driver's career. We've seen it before with legends like Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher. There comes a moment when raw talent has to be paired with calculated selfishness to achieve ultimate success. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating, because Hill hasn't just identified what Piastri did wrong. He's highlighted a specific area where the Australian has a clear advantage over everyone else on the grid, including his own teammate. The key strength Hill identified is Piastri's approach to wheel-to-wheel combat, particularly against Max Verstappen. While other drivers, including Norris, can be tentative or overly cautious when facing the Dutch champion, Piastri shows no such hesitation. Hill points to a perfect example from the Miami Grand Prix, where Piastri confidently set up and executed a pass on Verstappen. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a mistake from Max. It was pure racing intelligence and courage. Compare that to Norris's attempts to overtake Verstappen shortly afterward in the same race. Despite being only 2 seconds behind Piastri when they both caught up to the Red Bull, Norris took several attempts to make the pass stick, losing significant time in the process and allowing Piastri to build a 9-second advantage. This difference in approach hasn't gone unnoticed by Verstappen himself. Hill believes that Max has genuine respect for Piastri's aggressive and decisive overtaking style. When Piastri arrives in his mirrors, there's no hesitation, no second-guessing. He commits to the move and executes it with precision. Hill recalled another incident from Saudi Arabia, where both drivers got into some aggressive wheel-to-wheel action, with Verstappen even taking to the escape road and playing what Hill diplomatically called silly buggers, by not immediately giving back the position. The key point? Piastri wasn't intimidated by any of it. He stood his ground and earned Verstappen's respect in the process. This fearless approach to racing creates an interesting dynamic within McLaren. While Norris can sometimes be more circumspect and wary when battling Verstappen, Piastri has proven time and again that he's willing to take the fight directly to the multiple world champion. And Verstappen knows this difference between the two McLaren drivers. So what does this mean for 2026? We're potentially looking at a completely transformed Oscar Piastri, one who combines his natural racing ability with a more ruthless championship mindset. The painful lessons of 2025, particularly that decision at Monza, might prove to be the catalyst that unleashes his full potential. Think about it this way. Piastri has now experienced the crushing disappointment of losing a championship he had within his grasp. He's felt what it's like to prioritize team harmony over personal success and watch that decision contribute to his ultimate defeat. Those are the kind of experiences that forge champions, not break them. The combination of his proven wheel-to-wheel ability against the sport's elite and a newfound understanding of championship politics could make Piastri incredibly dangerous in 2026. He's already shown he can match Verstappen for pace and isn't intimidated by the pressure of fighting at the front. Now, armed with the hard-learned wisdom of what it takes to actually win a championship, he could become the complete package. Hill's analysis suggests we might be witnessing the birth of a new kind of competitor in Piastri, one who retains his exceptional, natural ability while developing the calculated edge that separates good drivers from champions. The 2026 season could very well be when Oscar Piastri transforms from promising talent to genuine title threat. And if Hill is right about his key strength, we might be in for some absolutely spectacular battles at the front of the grid. The question now isn't whether Piastri will learn from his 2025 experience. It's whether his rivals are ready for the version of him that emerges from it. What if I told you that while everyone's talking about Formula One's new era in 2026, one team has been quietly setting themselves up to absolutely dominate? Today, we're diving deep into why McLaren isn't just confident about the upcoming regulation changes. They're practically certain they'll be fighting for championships again when the sport transforms next year. Picture this. You've just won back-to-back Constructors' Championships. You're on top of the world, and then Formula One announces the biggest technical revolution in decades. Most teams would panic, scramble resources, maybe sacrifice their current success to prepare for the unknown future. But McLaren? They did something completely different, and it might just be the smartest strategic move in recent Formula One history. The story begins at the end of 2025, when McLaren found themselves in an impossible position. They were locked in an intense championship battle with Red Bull and Max Verstappen fighting tooth and nail for every single point. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking on, preparing for 2026's revolutionary new regulations. Every dollar spent on current car development was a dollar not invested in future success. Every engineer working on this year's upgrades was an engineer not designing next year's championship contender. This is where Formula One becomes absolutely ruthless. It's not just about being fast on track. It's about making impossible choices with limited resources. The budget cap means you can't just throw money at both problems. You have to choose, fight for today's glory or sacrifice it for tomorrow's dominance. Red Bull made their choice crystal clear. They went all in on 2025, developing their car until the very last race of the season. They even stripped resources from their sister team, leaving Yuki Tsunoda with virtually no updates to his car, just to funnel every possible advantage to Verstappen's championship fight. It was a win-at-all-costs mentality that paid off in the short-term, but came with serious consequences for their 2026 preparations. Other teams made different calculations entirely. Aston Martin and Williams, sitting in the midfield but harboring genuine ambitions of joining the frontrunners, essentially gave up on 2025 halfway through the season. They redirected their entire focus to mastering the new regulations, betting their future on getting a head start while the big teams were distracted by championship battles. But McLaren? They found a third way, and it's absolutely brilliant. According to team principal Andrea Stella, McLaren managed to do something that seemed impossible. They fought for the 2025 championship without compromising a single day of their 2026 development program. Think about that for a moment. While their main rival was making desperate trade-offs and other teams were abandoning entire seasons, McLaren was somehow doing both at full capacity. How is this even possible? The answer reveals something fascinating about McLaren's internal capabilities that most people completely miss. Stella claims that McLaren's technical department is so strong, so well organized, and so efficient that they didn't need to make the same sacrifices as everyone else. He's been in Formula One for 26 years and says this is the strongest technical team he's ever been part of. This isn't just corporate confidence speaking. McLaren's success in recent years has been built on something very specific: an unmatched ability to correlate data between their factory simulations and real-world track performance. While other teams struggle with cars that work perfectly in the wind tunnel but fail miserably on race day, McLaren has cracked this code better than anyone else. This correlation accuracy was the secret weapon that made them the benchmark team in the final years of ground effect cars. They understood how to optimize aerodynamic performance in ways that other teams couldn't match. But here's the crucial insight. According to Stella, these fundamental capabilities transfer directly to any set of regulations. The specific aerodynamic tricks that work under current rules might become obsolete in 2026, but the working methods, the development approach, the technical standards, the ability to accurately predict how design changes will perform in reality, all of that carries forward unchanged. This creates a compound advantage that most people don't recognize. While teams like Red Bull are now scrambling to catch up on 2026 development after focusing entirely on 2025, McLaren has been steadily building their next-generation car with the same methodical precision that made them champions. They haven't lost momentum, they haven't compromised their timeline, and they're entering 2026 with a full head of steam. But there's another psychological factor at play here that could be even more important. McLaren enters 2026 as the hunted rather than the hunters. They have a target on their back as the team to beat. Historically, this position comes with enormous pressure. Teams that dominate often struggle to adapt to major regulation changes because they become comfortable with their winning formula. However, McLaren's situation is different. They know they're starting from scratch with the new regulations, just like everyone else. Their recent success hasn't made them complacent, because they understand that 2026 is essentially a complete reset. Their confidence comes not from assuming their current car will remain competitive, but from trusting their ability to master whatever challenge the new regulations present. The 2026 regulation changes are massive. We're talking about completely new power unit specifications, dramatically different aerodynamic rules, and technical challenges that no team has faced before. The cars will look different, drive differently, and require entirely new approaches to setup and development. It's the kind of fundamental shift that can completely shuffle the competitive order. This is exactly the type of situation where McLaren's systematic approach could prove decisive. While some teams might get lucky with inspired design choices or breakthrough concepts, McLaren is betting on methodical excellence. They're not trying to hit a home run with revolutionary thinking. They're planning to execute the fundamentals better than anyone else. The budget cap adds another layer of complexity that plays to McLaren's strengths. With limited financial resources, efficiency becomes paramount. The team that can extract the most performance from every dollar spent will have a significant advantage. McLaren's track record of accurate development and minimal wasted effort suggests they're well positioned for this constrained environment. Looking ahead, 2026 represents the ultimate test of McLaren's recent transformation. They've evolved from a struggling midfield team into championship contenders, but can they maintain that level while adapting to completely new technical challenges? Their confidence suggests they view the regulation change not as a threat, but as an opportunity to further demonstrate their technical superiority. The fascinating aspect of McLaren's approach is how it challenges conventional wisdom about resource allocation in Formula One. The sport has always been about difficult choices between short-term performance and long-term development. McLaren is essentially claiming they've transcended this dilemma through superior organizational capability. If they're right, 2026 could mark the beginning of a new era of McLaren dominance. If they're wrong, their confidence might prove to be their downfall. But based on their recent track record and the systematic way they've built their current success, betting against McLaren's 2026 prospects would be unwise. The stage is set for one of the most intriguing seasons in Formula One history, and McLaren believes they hold the winning cards. While the entire Formula One paddock is holding its breath for the seismic changes coming in 2026, one team has decided to throw caution to the wind in the most spectacular way possible. Red Bull Racing, the team that dominated the sport for years, is about to gamble everything on a testing strategy so bold it could either secure their future dominance or send them tumbling down the championship standings. The 2026 Formula One regulation changes are unprecedented in their scope and complexity. We're talking about the most comprehensive overhaul the sport has witnessed in decades. New engine specifications, revolutionary aerodynamic concepts, and technological innovations that could fundamentally reshape how these magnificent machines perform on track. For most teams, this represents a terrifying unknown, where one miscalculation could doom an entire season before it even begins. But here's where the story gets absolutely fascinating. While every other team on the grid is planning to tiptoe into these new regulations with the caution of a bomb disposal expert, Red Bull has chosen a radically different path. They're preparing to charge headfirst into the unknown with a testing philosophy that's either pure genius or complete madness. Let me paint the picture of what's happening in the Formula One world right now. Team principals are losing sleep over these regulation changes, and for good reason. Fred Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, has been among the most vocal about the reliability risks these new cars present. His message is crystal clear. Teams need to prioritize getting their basic systems functioning properly before they can even think about extracting performance from their machines. For manufacturer teams like Ferrari, this conservative approach makes perfect sense. They need to establish fundamental benchmarks for both their power units and aerodynamic packages. Vasseur has gone so far as to suggest that the performance we see in the opening races of 2026 won't even matter much, predicting a tsunami of upgrades and specification changes throughout the early part of the season. This cautious mindset extends beyond just Ferrari. Audi's chief technology officer, Mattia Binotto, has echoed similar sentiments about prioritizing reliability above all else. The German manufacturer recently completed their first taste of 2026 running, logging 200 kilometers during a private test session in Barcelona. Even this limited running was conducted with extreme secrecy. They deliberately used a black livery to obscure their car from curious photographers and brought only the most basic version of their 2026 design to the Spanish circuit. The philosophy across the paddock seems unanimous. Slow and steady wins the race. Teams are planning to arrive at the first official tests with deliberately conservative packages, saving their more adventurous developments for later testing sessions once they've confirmed their fundamental systems work as intended. It's a sensible approach that minimizes risk while maximizing the chances of having a reliable car when the season begins. But Red Bull? They're throwing this conventional wisdom out the window entirely. According to insider sources, the Austrian team has embraced a dramatically different strategy that flies in the face of everything their competitors are doing. While others are planning to bring basic, safe packages to early testing, Red Bull is reportedly preparing to arrive with a much more aggressive and sophisticated approach right from the start. This isn't just about bringing a few extra aerodynamic updates or a slightly more powerful engine mode. We're talking about a fundamental philosophical difference in how to approach these massive regulation changes. Red Bull appears to be betting that being first to market with advanced solutions will give them an insurmountable advantage over rivals who are playing it safe. Think about the implications of this strategy for a moment. If Red Bull's gamble pays off, they could establish an early performance advantage that allows them to focus on refinement while their competitors are still figuring out the basics. But if their aggressive approach backfires, they could find themselves dealing with reliability nightmares, while teams like Ferrari and Audi methodically work their way up the performance ladder. This bold approach is quintessentially Red Bull. Throughout their Formula One journey, they've rarely been a team that follows conventional wisdom. From their innovative aerodynamic solutions to their willingness to promote young drivers, Red Bull has always marched to the beat of their own drum. This 2026 testing strategy appears to be another example of their willingness to take calculated risks that others won't. The timing of this revelation makes it even more intriguing. With teams like Audi already conducting their preliminary testing with ultra-conservative approaches, Red Bull's strategy creates a stark contrast in philosophies. While Audi celebrated completing their 200-kilometer test without major issues, Red Bull is seemingly preparing for something far more ambitious and potentially problematic. But let's consider what advantages this aggressive approach might offer. If Red Bull can successfully execute a complex testing program from day one, they'll gather exponentially more useful data than teams running basic packages. Performance data, reliability information, and development direction insights could all flow from a more sophisticated testing approach. The risk is enormous, but so is the potential reward. The question becomes whether Red Bull's engineering team has the confidence and capability to pull off this high-wire act. Their recent championship success suggests they have both the technical expertise and organizational culture to handle such an ambitious project. However, the 2026 regulations represent uncharted territory for everyone, regardless of past achievements. As we approach these crucial testing sessions, the contrasting strategies create a fascinating subplot to the main regulation change story. Will Red Bull's boldness pay dividends, or will the conservative approach adopted by most other teams prove wiser? The answer could shape the competitive balance for years to come. The implications extend beyond just Red Bull and their immediate competitors. If their aggressive testing strategy succeeds, it could force other teams to reconsider their own conservative approaches for future regulation changes. Conversely, if Red Bull struggles with reliability issues stemming from their complex early testing, it might reinforce the wisdom of measured, step-by-step development approaches. What makes this story particularly compelling is how it reflects broader themes in Formula One competition. The sport has always rewarded innovation and calculated risk-taking, but it also punishes teams that overreach. Red Bull's 2026 testing strategy embodies this tension perfectly. They're either positioning themselves for another period of dominance or setting themselves up for a spectacular fall. As we count down to these pivotal testing sessions, all eyes will be on Red Bull to see whether their contrarian approach delivers the results they're hoping for. The 2026 season might be decided before it even officially begins, based on the success or failure of these crucial early development phases. Red Bull has chosen their path. Now we'll discover whether it leads to glory or disaster. Ferrari just made a massive strategic shift that could completely change the championship battle in 2026, and nobody's talking about it. While everyone's obsessing over Mercedes and their controversial engine trick, Fred Vasseur is quietly orchestrating what might be the most brilliant psychological warfare campaign in modern Formula One history. You see, Ferrari has always been the team that attracts the spotlight. They're the ones making bold promises, generating headlines, and setting themselves up for spectacular failures. Remember 2023 when their CEO called their car unprecedented in terms of speed? Yeah, that aged about as well as milk in the desert when Red Bull proceeded to demolish everyone that season. But something fundamental has changed at Maranello, and it's not what you think. This isn't about new aerodynamics or revolutionary power units. This is about a complete philosophical transformation that's flying completely under the radar while their competitors stumble into the same traps Ferrari once fell into. The 2026 regulation changes represent the biggest shakeup Formula One has seen in decades. new power unit regulations, completely redesigned cars, and a format that will test every team's development capabilities to their absolute limits. Most teams are approaching this like a traditional season preparation, but Vasseur has identified something that everyone else is missing. Here's what's really happening behind the scenes. While Audi becomes the first team to test their 2026 car in Barcelona, completing filming days and generating buzz, Ferrari is deliberately staying out of the headlines. This might seem counterintuitive for a team that historically thrives on attention. But Vasseur understands something crucial about modern Formula One that his predecessors never grasped. The winter break feels shorter than ever with the intense 24-race calendar looming ahead. Teams are under immense pressure to make immediate impressions, to show their hand early, to prove they're championship contenders before the season even begins. But this creates a fundamental problem that Ferrari is actively avoiding. Mercedes has become the perfect example of what Ferrari used to do wrong. The German manufacturer is already being tipped as the benchmark for 2026, with their compression ratio innovation dominating headlines and reinforcing their status as early favorites. Their creative exploitation of the regulations, which the FIA currently deems legal, has everyone convinced they'll be unstoppable. But here's where Vasseur's genius becomes apparent. He's watching his competitors make the same mistakes Ferrari made for decades, and he's doing the complete opposite. Instead of seeking validation through pre-season hype, Ferrari is embracing the shadows, letting others carry the burden of expectations while they focus on what actually matters. The traditional Formula One narrative follows a predictable pattern. Teams make bold claims during winter testing, media builds expectations, fans choose their favorites, and then reality hits when the actual racing begins. Ferrari has been burned by this cycle repeatedly, most recently with their 2023 disappointment that followed months of optimistic predictions. Vasseur's approach represents a complete departure from this self-destructive pattern. When asked about Ferrari's championship prospects, he deliberately deflects attention away from early season predictions. His message is clear. The first race won't determine anything. Early standings are meaningless, and the real battle will be won through consistent development throughout the entire season. This isn't just humble rhetoric. It's a strategic positioning that gives Ferrari multiple advantages their competitors don't realize they're surrendering. When you're not the favorite, you don't carry the psychological weight of expectation. Your engineers can work without external pressure. Your drivers can focus on improvement rather than defending early season form. The 2026 regulations create an environment where rapid development will be absolutely crucial. Teams that can adapt quickly, identify weaknesses early, and implement improvements efficiently will have enormous advantages over those locked into early season concepts that prove inadequate. Ferrari understands that being the early favorite in this environment is actually a disadvantage. Mercedes is already locked into a narrative that positions them as the team to beat. If their early season performance doesn't match these expectations, the psychological impact could be devastating. If Ferrari starts slowly but improves rapidly, they'll be seen as the comeback story rather than the disappointment. But there's another layer to this strategy that's even more sophisticated. Vasseur is deliberately managing information flow in a way that keeps Ferrari's true capabilities hidden until it matters most. While other teams reveal their innovations through testing and media coverage, Ferrari is keeping their developments under wraps. This information asymmetry creates multiple strategic advantages. Competitors can't study Ferrari's solutions and develop countermeasures. The media can't build unrealistic expectations that create pressure. Most importantly, Ferrari can observe everyone else's approaches and adapt their own development accordingly. The psychology of championship battles often comes down to who handles pressure most effectively. Teams that enter seasons as overwhelming favorites frequently struggle with the weight of expectations. We've seen this repeatedly throughout Formula One history, where pre-season favorites crumble under pressure while unexpected challengers emerge from nowhere. Ferrari's approach acknowledges that modern Formula One championships are won through sustained excellence rather than early season dominance. The team that performs best across 24 races adapts most effectively to changing conditions and maintains psychological composure under pressure will ultimately succeed. This strategic shift also reflects Vasseur's understanding of how media narratives can become self-fulfilling prophecies. When teams are constantly discussed as championship contenders, every setback becomes magnified, every mistake becomes a crisis, and every strategic decision gets scrutinized endlessly. Ferrari is avoiding this trap entirely by maintaining low expectations while working toward high performance. The brilliance of this approach becomes clear when you consider the alternative scenarios. If Ferrari emerges as a genuine championship contender after starting the season under the radar, they'll be positioned as the inspiring underdog story that everyone wants to support. If they struggle early but improve throughout the season, they'll be seen as the team that never gave up, rather than the disappointment that failed to meet expectations. Meanwhile, Mercedes and other early favorites face the opposite dynamic. Any early season struggles will be magnified as proof that their pre-season hype was unwarranted. Any mid-season improvements will be seen as desperate attempts to salvage disappointing campaigns rather than natural development progressions. Vasseur's emphasis on development capacity rather than early season performance also reflects a sophisticated understanding of how modern Formula One actually works. The teams that win championships aren't necessarily those with the fastest cars in pre-season testing. They're the teams that can identify problems quickly, implement solutions efficiently, and maintain consistent improvement throughout entire seasons. This approach requires incredible confidence in your team's fundamental capabilities. You have to believe that your engineers, drivers, and operational staff are good enough to compete at the highest level without needing external validation through media hype and pre-season. Predictions. Ferrari's new strategy represents a complete maturation of their organizational psychology. Instead of seeking immediate gratification through headlines and early season success, they're playing a longer game that prioritizes sustainable performance over flashy demonstrations. The ultimate test of this approach will come when the 2026 season actually begins. If Ferrari emerges as a genuine championship contender after flying under the radar all winter, Vasseur's strategy will be vindicated as brilliant psychological warfare. If they struggle while their hyped competitors succeed, critics will argue that low expectations became self-fulfilling limitations. But based on everything we know about championship psychology and development dynamics in modern Formula One, Ferrari's approach gives them the best possible foundation for sustained success. They're building pressure-free environments for peak performance while their competitors voluntarily accept the burden of unrealistic expectations. This isn't just about winning races or championships. This is about fundamentally changing how a legendary team approaches competition in the modern era. Ferrari has finally learned that in Formula One, sometimes the best way to win is to let everyone else think they're going to lose.